Time to write our second trigger. This time, we'll try some slightly different business logic while reinforcing the concepts we've already covered. Again, follow along in your own developer org so you can build that much needed muscle memory. Trust me, it is not a waste of your time and energy. You will slow down your learning if you're not actively coding alongside me. Okay, let's pretend it's Dreamforce, and your company this year purchased a booth in the exhibition hall to help generate some quality opportunities. To help your product stand out amongst the hundreds of other booths, your company is offering a special deal. Every qualified person who participates in a sales demo gets an Apple Watch. Pretty sweet deal if you ask me. Of course, your sales team runs their entire business in Salesforce, and you, the Salesforce developer, needs to build the processes to enable this promotion. So here's the deal. We need a trigger that creates a task for every new opportunity. The task subject will be Apple Watch promo. It'll have a description, and the priority of this task, of course, will be high. You don't want your customers to be waiting. Also, you're going to make sure the task is associated with our opportunity so our sales reps and managers can see its status directly on an opportunity layout. Ready to make some magic? We're going to write this trigger once again using the coding editor in Salesforce setup. No shame in using this editor since you're so early in your coding career. We'll be graduating from this soon. So first we'll go to Setup, Customize, Opportunities, since this trigger runs whenever a creation event happens on an opportunity, then Triggers, then New. Once again, we're presented with a basic template to help us get started with our trigger. Let's name this trigger Apple Watch. We'll type this using camel case, making sure to capitalize the first letter of each word and not using any spaces. This trigger will run on the insert event, since the trigger should only execute whenever an opportunity is created for the first time. Last time we wrote a trigger, we preceded our event with before. This time, we're going to use after. I promise I'll explain to you the differences between before and after triggers soon. In a nutshell though, our trigger will not work if the logic ran before the opportunity was inserted. Try to think of a good reason why while I cover the rest of the code. Give yourself a pat on the back if you know what's coming next. It's our trigger loop. We're going to add an indent before writing this trigger loop because this loop runs inside the scope of our trigger. Since it's inside the brackets of other code, it needs to be indented to make it more readable. Since this loop is running inside the scope of an opportunity trigger, we're going to make our temporary variable an opportunity and name it OPP. OPP is our variable name, and we're choosing it because it describes itself well enough. Sometimes you might be tempted to give your variables names that have absolutely no correlation with what it actually represents. This happens a lot more than it actually should. For example, we could call this variable 1, and even though it might make sense to you, it'd be completely confusing to anyone else reading your code later on. Next, we make sure this loops through trigger.new, our list of all records entering this trigger. This loop is going to have code running within its context, aka scope. So we're going to add brackets. Notice how I immediately make sure I have my close bracket after I write my open bracket. This is commonly done so you don't forget to add your closing bracket later on. Finally, we're done with the boilerplate code, and now we can move on to actual business logic. Since our business logic is running inside the scope of our trigger loop, we're going to add another indentation for each line of code within. We wanted this trigger to create a new task. The syntax for that goes like this. First, we create a task variable, and we're going to call it the letter T. Then we're going to set it equal to a new task record just like this. New, any object, then open and close parentheses will create a new record in Apex. We can use any object here to create the object of our choice. Now that we have a new task record and it's assigned to our variable t, we can start setting fields on it. Just as we did in our first trigger, we're going to set fields using dots. Subject and description are free text fields. Whenever you're dealing with text in Apex, you want to make sure it's surrounded in single quotes. Don't forget your semicolons to end each statement here too. The priority field is actually a pick list field, but Apex treats pick lists and free text fields the same way, so you need to use single quotes here also. Fun fact, using Apex, you can populate pick list fields with text that's not part of the pick list's predefined values. But we're good developers, so we'll use a predefined choice. Now we need to associate the task to our opportunity. Since this is code, we don't use field labels when referencing fields, we use their API names, also known as developer names. A quick Google search says the API name of a task related to field is called whatID. And if you've ever populated lookup or master detail fields in a tool like Data Loader, you know that these fields are always populated, of course, using an ID, not a record's name. This is because multiple records can share the same name, but they'll never share the same ID. Since we want to associate the task with the opportunity, we use OPP, the current opportunity record in our trigger loop iteration, and pool its ID. Finally, we need to physically insert this task. Up until now, it existed only in our code. This insert statement adds it into our Salesforce database. Being the clean freak that I am, I have an urge to clean up the spacing and make sure all the equal signs align. This is not required, but it helps me sleep better at night. Finally, we save and make sure no errors showed up on the page. If you are getting errors, make sure you copied my code exactly the way it is, especially those darn single quotes and semicolons that are so easily missed. Congratulations! Trigger 2 is now under your belt. Now let's do a gut check and make sure our trigger works. We'll create a brand new opportunity and double check that a task was created on it. Here it is, and clicking into it, we see that all the proper fields are populated. Well done, folks.